Hey everyone, welcome back to another edition of No Holds Barred here at the Toronto Sun. Rob Wong, joined as always by Postmedia wrestling writer Jan Murphy. We are pleased to be joined today by one of the most influential men in wrestling history. You know him best for his time with WCW and WWE. He is a WWE Hall of Famer, and you can check out his 83 Weeks with Eric Bischoff podcast. He recently launched alongside Hulk Hogan and legendary freestyle wrestler and coach Izzy Martinez, Real American Freestyle, the first ever pro freestyle wrestling league. It is Eric Bischoff. Eric, thanks so much for joining us today.
I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for the
Awesome.
invitation.
Yeah, no worries. Lots to talk with you about, but got to start there with RAF, where you'll be the Chief Media Officer. What can you tell us about Real American Freestyle as we get closer to the first event on August the 30th?
Wow, you just made me nervous when you said we're getting closer to that first event. I keep hoping I've got an extra 30 days in there somewhere. What can I tell you? Well, you summed it up perfectly. This is really the first, it's not the first attempt, but this is probably the first legitimate attempt. I should be careful with that word too. I'm going to offend somebody, and I'm trying not to. I'm trying so hard not to be offensive, but it's getting more and more difficult every day sometimes. Um, but we're venture backed, meaning we've got sufficient funding behind us with a long-term plan, and the goal is to create a professional freestyle wrestling league. Unless you're a competitor, you're an amateur wrestler or friends, family thereof, people are generally aware of amateur wrestling, but it only comes around once every 4 years in Olympics, and the college competition is what it is. But this is the first time we're going to be able to create a platform with these elite athletes. And I'm talking about athletes of all ages, really. I mean, over 18, obviously, but that come from various stages within their freestyle wrestling career. You have high school, which is called folk style, if to be specific. You transition into college and it's more of a freestyle. The point system is different, things are just slightly different. And from there, you either go to the Olympics or you kind of compete just for fun in different tournaments around the world. But there's nowhere really to go with a skill set that a lot of these athletes have been developing since they were like 5 years old. So this will be an opportunity for elite world-class athletes, literally from all over the world. We're signing wrestlers from Russia, from India, from Japan, from Mexico. So it'll be a very diverse group of elite amateur athletes competing in a sport that they love. And if you look at freestyle wrestling, amateur wrestling, if you want to call it that, it really is the foundation of MMA. Wrestling is the oldest combat sport. And whether it's jujitsu or collegiate Olympic style wrestling, that is such an important part of every MMA fighter's toolkit. So we're excited about it. Can you tell?
Eric, you've been around a lot of the guys who've made it from amateur wrestling to professional wrestling. Who is the best? I mean, we have Brock Lesnar's there, Kurt Angle's there, Chad Gable now. Who is the best that you've ever been around?
Well, I think, just by virtue of the metric, Kurt Angle. He's the only one I've ever been around that won a gold medal. But that's not taking anything away from any of the other, athletes that you mentioned. Brock Lesnar I mean, he's just an unbelievable athlete. I mean, he's a guy that walked on, never played a game of football in his life, and he walked on and made the Minnesota Vikings. I mean, that's kind of a rare athlete.
Yeah.
And obviously his NCAA wrestling career speaks for itself. His professional wrestling career speaks for itself. So I don't think you can compare, or contrast who the best is. But if you look at, Kurt, Brock, Chad Gable, you mentioned, Nick Nemeth, formerly known as Dolph Ziggler. Hell, Mick Foley came from a high school amateur wrestling background. It is such a fundamental part of both professional wrestling as we know it, sports entertainment, and like I said, MMA. The intersection is freestyle wrestling.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, Jade and I spoke with Ken Shamrock recently, and we sort of asked him why do you think not more MMA people have made the crossover to professional wrestling, and he was obviously one of the pioneers of that, and you're kind of speaking now about freestyle wrestling and how for a lot of these athletes there isn't really much place to go after a certain while. So the fact that you're doing this and giving them an opportunity is really great to see. As I said off the top, lots to talk to you about today with WWE. We'll get into some AEW as well. I mentioned your 83 Weeks podcast, so clearly you're still watching a lot of the current events and things that are going on right now in the wrestling industry. What are your just general impressions of the landscape and how things are going right now with WWE and TNA and AEW and just the whole landscape of professional wrestling at this moment?
It's really an exciting time. I love growth. I love expansion. I like to see people succeed. And WWE is on such an amazing trajectory from a business perspective. If you can separate, fandom, I'm not speaking about you specifically, but if one can separate their fandom and their emotional attachment to the product, even the storylines as well as the characters, and just look at the numbers in the expansion and the growth of WWE, TKO, it's mind-boggling. In an era where most entertainment properties are contracting, getting smaller, it's getting more difficult if you're a publicly held company to perform for your shareholders. It's an incredibly difficult market, the entertainment space. However, WWE seems to be defying all odds and is growing at an amazingly rapid pace. You look at TNA. Now, I don't watch a lot of TNA. Frankly, at this point, with this project under my belt, I don't, or on my table, I should say, I don't have a chance to watch a lot, but I keep up with what's going on. And I, in particular, am more interested in the business of the wrestling business than I am in who beat who and what was the finish, or how many stars did you give that match? I mean, that's great that people love that kind of stuff. I particularly think it's juvenile. It doesn't interest me, but I'm fascinated with growth and with strategy. And if you look at TNA from where I sit outside looking in, they're making some really interesting moves. We're seeing growth. We're seeing larger crowds. We're seeing a better television product. And they're doing it very quietly. They're not coming out and comparing themselves, for example, to the number 2 promotion, which is AEW. They're just showing up to work every day and figuring out new ways to make a better product and to attract a larger audience. To me, that's one of the most exciting stories kicking off the second half of this year. I think TNA is a sleeper. I think we're going to see some really cool things out of TNA, and I'm excited for them. I don't know anybody there anymore, maybe a few of the wrestlers, but whoever is running that company in making these decisions, hats off to you, kind sirs or madams, whichever the case may be.
Well, I know Tommy Dreamer is heavily involved behind the scenes with TNA. I'm sure there's a few others off the top of my head. I can't think of who they are, but to go back to WWE for a second, Eric, this week, Sunday, Ron Killings tweeted out that he had been, not re-signed by WWE. You have a perspective, and that you can sort of tell us what it's like to make hard decisions, like letting an 18-year veteran, who's probably at as good as he's been right now, at the top of his game, if you want to call it. He's older, but very entertaining. What goes into, give us a little bit of an idea from WWE's perspective, how to make these hard decisions.
Well, I'm certainly not there, and I can't tell you specifically, but in general, it's always a math equation. That's the hard part about operating a business, especially if you're an executive, especially if you're at the very top of the executive food chain. You have to make decisions that are good for your company. In this case, it's a publicly held company, so there's a fiduciary responsibility amongst its officers to make decisions that return and the most profit to your shareholders, potentially. That's an obligation. That is a legal obligation. And I really want to spend just 30 seconds on this so people understand the position someone like a Nick Khan or Paul Levesque is in when it comes time to sit down and look at that list of names. Because all of us as fans and friends, in my case, some of these people are friends of mine I've known for decades.
Yeah.
But you have to be able to put that aside and just get out your calculator. That's a tough job. because once you're done with your calculator and you know what you have to do to be responsible to your shareholders, in the case of Paul and Nick, WWE, you just got to do the math. And then the hard part comes when you have to sit down with somebody who I'm sure, I don't know of anybody I've ever heard that didn't think Ron Killings is one of the greatest people to be around. I don't know the man. I've probably interacted with him and said hello, but I've never had a chance to work with him or get to know Ron. But I certainly know of him and have been entertained by him. And anybody that I've ever met has nothing but great things to say about Ron. And I'm sure Paul Levesque feels the same way, and Nick Khan. But the numbers don't. If you look at where Ron is, he's been used sporadically. He's not in a weekly storyline. He shows up. He's one of the most entertaining characters on the show, in my opinion, just in terms of pure entertainment value. In fact, before this last PLE, when it was Ron Cena and John Cena, um, I said in my podcast that I was really hoping that they'd put Ron over. It was a non-title match. I would have loved to seen that.
Yeah.
The finish of quite honestly, almost a perfect hero's journey third act. If you know of Joseph Campbell and how he structures stories, it would have been just such an amazing end to the Ron Killings journey in WWE had he been able to win that non-title match. It wouldn't have taken anything away from John. John could have gotten his heat back very, very easily. People wouldn't have even really, all they'd remember is, yeah, he didn't get the belt, but he beat John Cena. Why not end the Ron Killings story that way? I would have campaigned hard for that, to be honest with you. But they made another choice for reasons that none of us know. And we can only speculate about in Armchair Quarterback. But it's got to be a hard decision, man. I've had to make a couple of those. And it just tears your guts out. The worst part is knowing you have to do it. Like a lot of times you've come to these conclusions days, weeks, sometimes months in advance. And it's like when do you tell someone? My rule of thumb is tell them as soon as you come to the conclusion so they have time to plan. But man, it's a tough one. I hate it. I freaking hate it.
Yeah, really.
What are your impressions of John Cena this last run of John Cena so far to this point?
It's finally starting to click for me. I didn't really like the turn. I thought it was weird. It just came from out of nowhere for me. I didn't see a lot of storyline build up. I didn't see a lot of change in John's character. It just felt like, okay, now he's a heel. And none of it made sense to me really on an emotional level. But his last few promos, I would say the last three,
Yeah,
starting to make me feel like he's really a heel. And I like it. I'm happy for it.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because we know he's leaving, or at least he says he is at the end of the year. So there's sort of I guess, an expiry date on this heel character, Eric. And I know some people have speculated that, at some point he's probably gonna turn back to being a face. Can't imagine John Cena just ending his career as a heel. Does that sort of make it? I don't know if weird is the word, but that something is going to happen by a certain date. Whereas maybe normally, you'd be waiting for the payoff and you're not exactly sure when it's going to happen. Maybe it's a WrestleMania or a SummerSlam. But the fact that there's seemingly a definitive date here, that, you're just kind of waiting to see what happens and everything sort of in between is not, immaterial, but you're just knowing that the payoff is going to happen at some point in December. It's kind of odd that way.
Yes, I understand that perspective, and I think perhaps even feel that way a little bit. There's still that part of my fandom, my desire to suspend disbelief is what it really is, because that allows me to really get sucked into it and feel like I'm on the journey, with John in a way. But I also understand how entertainment has changed. And while the element of surprise, which would be a sudden turn of events, a sudden turn in character, for example, you normally don't see that. You're not sure if it's coming or not. You're starting to see little indications or hear things in promos that they intentionally start tipping their hand a little bit to suck you in. So you start following the story. in this case, I think this is almost like Top Gun. You had the original, and then the next one comes out. What do they call it? A sequel comes out. And you pretty much know what the end of that movie is going to be. But it sells $2 billion worth of tickets anyway because people know what they're going to see and they just want to be part of the experience. And I think that gray area between a traditional wrestling fan waiting for the surprise and now the general entertainment fan who appreciates professional wrestling for what it is, not what they want it to be, and just want to see the performance and see how it plays out. I think that's the case with John in particular. I don't know that that approach is sustainable, across the board, because the element of surprise is one of the things that most wrestling fans appreciate the most about wrestling and why it's different than scripted entertainment or whatever, even sports, is they love that element of surprise. So I think it has to have to find a balance, and maybe that's what they're doing, but it's fun to watch.
The promos, like you said, I've enjoyed them all along. I mean, I find the I'm gonna ruin wrestling thing to be pretty funny considering it's John Cena, but like you, I'm starting to see him dig in. He's had to work
So
harder
what?
than
So what? Let's play armchair quarterback, right? And I hate people that do this to me, but I'm going to do it to them because what the hell? I can't, right? I can't be fired at this point. They're tired of firing me, actually. Say, oh, not him again. I don't want to fire him again. You fire him next time. Um, but what if? I was thinking about this the other day. What if John Cena's whole "I'm gonna ruin wrestling" somehow involved John's influence to get Ron Killings released?
Oh,
And what if there was such a fan backlash, like chants during main events, people just voicing their opinion and love for R-Truth, which I don't know. Back in my day, they called that heat. That would put heat on John Cena. And then just say, what if some really, really smart, creative mind went, hey, wait a minute, we can make this work. Here's how we make this work. I don't know, man.
that's pretty
I don't
good.
think I don't think this story's over till it's over. Call me, I don't know, a mark
Did you ever
or
fire anybody to involve them in a storyline to only bring them back later? Because that's kind of what we're talking here, right? If
Brian
Ron,
Pillman.
that's right.
Right.
It's a
Wow.
Brian Pillman. It's a Brian Pillman story. Oh, story. Instead of take out crazy Brian Pillman, he did that character so well. Um, God bless you, Brian. I miss Brian. He was nutty, but he was fun. Like Randy Savage, just crazy fun to be around. Just like, oh, but it's really fun. I can't help it either. um, take out Brian Pillman, insert Ron Killings. Take out a heel, insert a babyface.
Nothing's
Yeah.
off the
No, definitely. That seems to. Now you got me thinking. Now that the wheels are spinning in my head, that
See,
maybe
that's
there
the
is something
fun
here.
thing
Yeah.
about wrestling is you have these possibilities that you can play out in your own mind, and it keeps it interesting. And that's one of the things that I really love about WWE and why even though I don't work there, obviously, but I have friends there that do. But man, their storytelling is so interesting because you can take a different path almost at any turn. There's so many ways to put that story together, and I love the intricacies of it. They're paying a lot of attention to details.
So it's interesting. That kind of segues into a question I had wanted to ask you about with regards to kayfabe. And you're an old school guy, and there's a lot of old school wrestlers out there that have sort of voiced their opinions on that. And it's not as strict as it used to be, whether it's in WWE or other promotions. But as someone that had control over creative like yourself years ago, do you feel it's still necessary in today's wrestling landscape?
It depends on the degree to which you're trying to quote unquote kayfabe the audience. I think the term is no longer applicable. Kayfabe doesn't really exist um, the way it did. The way people, it's funny. I heard you refer to me as old school. I was like, who? Who's
We're
here?
all old school here. We're
Oh,
all
wait
old
a
school
minute.
here. Yeah.
That's me. But the funny part of this is, I, it when I was in my 40s, right? Late 30s and 40s, and I'm in WCW and I'm turning the world upside down and taking it to WWE and doing all the crazy stuff I did. It's like, man, these old school guys hate this Bischoff, man. He just doesn't get it. He doesn't understand the business. This is every generation looks at the generation before it is old school. But the business changes along the way. And I think one of the things that changed a lot, it started in the 80s with WWE, Vince McMahon, Linda McMahon, just coming out because they had an issue with athletic commissions, coming out and saying, okay, we're not going to do that anymore because we're not a sport. So go away and quit taking our money.
Mm.
And it worked. Now, it kind of shattered people's illusions, I guess, if anybody really held them. I don't think anybody really believed it was real, a very small part of the audience, but they wanted to believe it was real. They wanted to be entertained by it. They wanted to be able to suspend their disbelief, just like I do. And that seemingly was taken away from them throughout the 80s, the 90s. Nitro comes along, it's more reality based. For about a year and a half, we're just kicking WWE's butt, like just slapping around in the locker room like they're just a pain in the ass. Just get away from, it was really kind of lopsided for a long time. And then they kind of dug in and pretty much did what I was doing, which was going after the 18 to 49-year-old audience with a more reality-based kind of approach to the product instead of like crazy garbage men and Martians that fly in and wrestle and IRS, Mounties, got to have a Mountie because we have Canadian fans, got to have a Mountie. But they went to the shift to the Attitude Era. And then you started seeing more the reality presentation that I was doing on Nitro and what Attitude Era was doing in WWE created this gray area where the audience would go, yeah, I don't know, okay, it's all scripted, we know, but that's real. That other stuff is crazy. We know it's scripted, but this one right here, this story, this is real. That's how the NWO got over. When Scott Hall came down through that crowd, nobody ever seen that before.
Mm-hmm.
Now on national television, that had never happened before. Well, because it never happened before, the audience felt like, oh, that must be real because I've never seen it before. That's not supposed to happen. He's supposed to come out through the entrance. Why is he coming down through the crowd? He's invading this place, and we're here to see it. This is real. That's the fun of this business. So I don't think kayfabe is dead. I do think it's dead, but I think the art of suspending disbelief in a world where everybody knows it's scripted is no different than the art in making a good movie or writing a good book. It's capturing the audience's imagination in a way that allows them to go, yeah, I know it's fake, but I love this stuff. Because you feel it. When you're connected to someone like Ron Killings, you have an emotional connection to him as a fan. And he makes you laugh. He brings joy into your life to some degree. So it's easy to get heat on a guy like that. That's the beauty of this. And people get so invested emotionally in the characters that they like or don't like, in my case, thank God, in my case, that they don't care about kayfabe because they're getting the same buzz. They're getting that same dopamine hit because they're allowing themselves to suspend disbelief just like they did back in the 50s and the 60s.
Yeah. Well
Last
said.
one from me, Eric. It's just a quick story. It's my Eric Bischoff story. I have a story for everyone I've
Oh
ever
God, do
met.
I owe you money? You're not gonna embarrass me.
No. So you gave me an interview when I started my own website many years ago in exchange for a charitable donation. And I was able to then track where the reads from that website, that story. So we launched the website with an interview with you. And one of the reads was from the International Space Station. So you can now claim that you've been read on Earth and outside of Earth.
Really, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's a nice little tidbit. I'm gonna brag about that shit.
Yeah, that's a good one. Eric, thanks so much for the time today. We really appreciate it, and hopefully we can talk again down the road.
I had a blast. Anytime you guys want to do this, you know how to find me. I'm easy.
Great.
Thanks, Eric.